My name is Eleanor Vance, I'm 67 years old, and on the night before my only son's wedding, my daughter-in-law told me the greatest gift I could give them was to disappear from their family forever. Before I tell you how I gave them a wedding gift they'll never forget, a gift that involved a lawyer, the police, and a single piece of paper that destroyed their future, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. It all happened in the kitchen, the one I'd helped them buy. The late evening sun streamed through the wide windows, making the granite countertops gleam. It was supposed to be a happy time. My son Ethan was getting married in the morning. His fiancée, Chloe, was showing me a picture of her wedding dress on her phone. Then she looked up, her phone going dark in her hand. A smile played on her lips, but it was a smile that didn't reach her eyes. They were cold like chips of ice. "Eleanor," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "We were just talking, Ethan and I, about wedding gifts." I smiled back, feeling a warmth spread through my chest. "Oh, you don't need to worry about that, dear. My gift is helping you two get started in this beautiful home." Her smile widened, but it became sharper somehow. "That's sweet. But we were thinking of something else. Something more meaningful." She paused, letting the silence stretch, savoring the moment. "The greatest gift you could possibly give us for our wedding is if you disappear from our family." The words hung in the air, sharp and glittering as shattered glass. For a second I couldn't breathe. It felt like a punch to the gut, knocking all the air out of my lungs. My gaze darted to Ethan, my son, my only child. I was looking for denial, for outrage, for him to step in and say, "Chloe, what are you talking about?" He didn't. He just stared down at the polished hardwood floors, the ones I remembered helping them pick out. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He just shifted his weight from one foot to the other, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. His silence was a roar. It was an agreement. A hot flush crawled up my neck. The beautiful, spacious kitchen suddenly felt like it was closing in on me. Disappear. The word echoed in my head. A year ago I had done the exact opposite. I had sold a part of my soul to appear in their lives, to make sure they had the foundation I thought every young couple deserved. After my husband, Robert, passed away from a sudden heart attack, my world had collapsed. The two of us had built a life in a small coastal cottage right here in Charleston, South Carolina. Every corner of that house held a memory of him. His laughter in the living room, the smell of his coffee in the morning, the feel of his hand in mine as we watched the sunset from the porch. Selling that house felt like tearing a piece of my own soul out. It was more than just wood and nails. It was the last piece of Robert the first had left. But I did it. I sold it because Ethan and Chloe were dreaming of this house, in this upscale neighborhood. They had good jobs, but with student loans and the cost of living, they couldn't scrape together enough for a down payment. So I gave it to them. $90,000. My entire retirement nest egg. It was everything I had from the sale of my life with Robert. I remember the day I transferred the money. Sitting in the bank, I felt a pang of fear. A little voice asking if this was wise. But then I pictured Ethan's face, the joy and relief when I told him. And I thought, this isn't losing money. This is an investment. An investment in my family's future, in my own future. A guarantee that I wouldn't spend my golden years alone. "We'll never forget this, Mom," Ethan had said, hugging me tightly. "There will always be a room for you here. Always." Chloe had echoed his words, her eyes shining. "This is your home too, Eleanor. Forever. Forever." What a fragile word that turned out to be. Now, standing in that same kitchen, the words "disappear from our family" ricocheted off the expensive stainless steel appliances. I looked at the boy I raised, the one whose scraped knees I'd bandaged and whose nightmares I'd soothed. He was a stranger to me now, a man who would stand by and watch his mother be thrown away like trash. And Chloe, she was watching me, a smug, triumphant look on her face. She was expecting me to cry, to beg, to make a scene that she could later recount to her friends, laughing about how dramatic his old mother was. In that moment I wasn't a mother. I wasn't a future grandmother. I was just an obstacle. An inconvenience to be removed before the real party could begin. The life I'd built, the sacrifices I'd made, the inheritance from Robert the First had so freely given, it all amounted to this. A cold dismissal on the eve of what was supposed to be a joyous family occasion. The shock began to fade and something else took its place. Something cold and hard and clear. a quiet fury that settled deep in my bones. I refused to give them the satisfaction of my tears. I straightened my back, lifted my chin, and held myself still as a statue. I took a slow, deliberate breath, my eyes locking onto Chloe's smug gaze, and I opened my mouth to speak. My voice when it came out was unnervingly calm. It didn't tremble. It didn't break. "Oh," I said, my gaze steady on Chloe's triumphant face. "I see." Just 2 words. It wasn't the reaction she wanted. I saw a flicker of disappointment in her eyes before she masked it with a bright, false smile. "I'm glad you understand, Eleanor. It's for the best." Ethan finally looked up, a wave of what looked like relief washing over his face. He was glad I hadn't made a scene. He was glad it was over so quickly. "Mom," he started, his voice placating, "we just need our own space to start our marriage. It's not personal. Not personal. Being told to vanish from your son's life is about as personal as it gets." I didn't say that, though. I just gave a slow, deliberate nod. "I understand completely," I said. Then I turned around and walked out of the kitchen, each step feeling heavy as lead. I didn't run. I didn't stomp. I walked up the stairs to my room, the guest room, with all the dignity I could muster. As I climbed, I could hear their voices behind me, already bright and cheerful, the tension gone. They were laughing about something. The sound was like a physical blow. They were celebrating my dismissal. I closed the door to my room behind me, the click of the latch sounding like a gavel on my old life. The room was lovely, of course. Chloe had helped me decorate it when I moved in, which meant she had picked out everything, from the pale gray paint to the bland, impersonal art on the walls. Nothing in it felt like me. There were no pictures of Robert, no familiar quilt from our old bed. It was a room for a visitor, and I had been too blind, too desperate for a family to see it. The promises they had made echoed in my ears, mocking me. "This is your home too, Eleanor. Forever." What a lie that had been. The early days had been filled with such hope. I remember walking through this house before they closed the deal, listening to Chloe point out where the Christmas tree would go, where we would have family dinners. Ethan had put his arm around me and said, "We'll be so happy here, Mom. All of us." I had clung to those words like a lifeline in the lonely sea of my grief after Robert died. But lifelines can fray. Promises can fade. The change was gradual. So gradual I almost didn't notice it at first. Started with small things. Decisions about the house being made without me. "Oh, we didn't think you'd mind if we painted the dining room navy, Eleanor." They started going out for dinner more often, just the 2 of us, needing their couple time. I understood, of course. I tried to be accommodating. I made myself smaller and smaller, quieter and quieter, hoping not to be a burden. I cooked for them, cleaned the house while they were at work, tended the garden. I tried to make myself useful, indispensable. I told myself that love meant patience, that if I just kept giving, they would eventually see my value. But the more I gave, the less I seemed to exist. The final, brutal awakening had come about a month ago. Chloe was having some friends over for brunch. I had helped her prepare everything and then retreated to my room to give them privacy. The door was slightly ajar, and I overheard one of her friends ask, "Is Ethan's mom still living with you guys?" And I heard Chloe's light, careless laugh. "Oh God, yes. She's a permanent fixture. It's fine, I guess. It's like having a built-in, unpaid housekeeper. But sometimes I feel like I'm living in her house. You know? She's just always here." My blood ran cold. An unpaid housekeeper. A fixture. That's what I was to her. Not a mother, not family. Just a piece of furniture that happened to do the laundry. Now, standing in the middle of the guest room, I finally saw the truth. I had been living in a fantasy. I opened the closet and pulled out the suitcase I'd brought with me from the coast. Felt strange to be packing it again. From downstairs I could hear them clearly now, their voices excited. "We could turn this into a great home office for you, honey," Chloe was saying to Ethan. "Or a yoga room," Ethan replied. "You've always wanted one." Their excitement over my absence was the final twist of the knife. They weren't just pushing me out. They were dancing on the grave of the life I thought we had. I moved with a slow, methodical calm, folding my clothes, placing them neatly in the suitcase. Each shirt, each sweater felt heavier than it should. With each item I packed, I felt a layer of my old self shedding away. The hopeful, grieving widow was gone. The accommodating, quiet guest was gone. I didn't know who was left, but I knew she wouldn't be silent anymore. I zipped the suitcase shut. The sound was decisive, final. I carried it downstairs, my steps steady on the polished wood. They were in the living room, looking at paint swatches online, already redesigning my life away. They looked up as I approached, a flicker of surprise in their eyes. They hadn't expected me to act so quickly. "Mom? What are you doing?" Ethan asked, a frown creasing his forehead. "I'm giving you your wedding gift," I said, my voice even. "A little early." I didn't wait for a reply. I walked straight to the front door, opened it and stepped out into the cool Charleston night, pulling the door shut behind me. I didn't slam it. I closed it softly, gently. It was more final that way. The night air felt good on my hot face. I put my suitcase in the trunk of my car and sat in the driver's seat for a long moment, just breathing. The street was quiet, the windows of their perfect house glowing with warm, welcoming light. A perfect family home. It was all a lie. Tears I had refused to shed in front of them now pricked at my eyes. But they weren't just tears of sorrow. They were tears of rage. How could I have been so stupid? How could I have given everything I had, my security, my husband's legacy, to people who saw me as nothing more than a temporary inconvenience? I pulled out my phone, my hand trembling slightly. I didn't know where to go. All my old friends were back at the coast. Then I thought of Margaret, my best friend since high school. She lived just on the other side of town. I dialed her number. She picked up on the second ring. "Eleanor? Is everything okay? It's late." And then it all came pouring out. The whole ugly story, from the guest room to the overheard conversation to the final brutal dismissal in the kitchen. I cried then, deep, ragged sobs for my own foolishness, for my son's betrayal, for the loss of a future I had so desperately wanted. Margaret listened patiently, making quiet, comforting sounds until I had cried myself out. When I was finished, there was a long silence on the line. Then she said, "Eleanor, honey, that boy is a fool and that girl is a viper. But I want you to think about something. Think about Robert." "Robert?" I asked, confused. "What does he have to do with this?" "Robert was the most careful, practical man I ever knew," she said. "He loved you and Ethan more than anything, but he wasn't a fool. Are you telling me he let you give away your entire life savings, your inheritance, without any kind of protection? Just as gift?" Her words were like a key turning in a long-forgotten lock. A memory surfaced, hazy at first, then sharpening into focus. It was from the week after Robert's funeral, a horrible gray time that I had mostly blocked out. I was at the office of our family lawyer, David Miller, the one who handled Robert's will. Ethan and Chloe were there too. I was signing papers, my mind numb with grief. But now I remembered. Robert had set up this meeting before he passed. He'd had a premonition, maybe. In the memory, David was explaining the transfer of funds for the house. And Robert, in my memory, was standing beside me. I could almost feel his hand on my shoulder. He had pulled me aside before that meeting, his face serious. "Eleanor," he'd said, his voice a low rumble. "I love that boy of ours. But that girl. There's something about her that worries me. She's got an appetite for things. We'll help them, of course. But we do it smart. This isn't a gift, Elle. It's a loan. We put it on paper. To protect you. To protect what we built together." My God. He had seen it. All this time he had seen it. In my fog of grief, I had signed the papers David put in front of me, trusting my husband's foresight, and then I had completely forgotten about it. I had been living like a beggar when all along I held the keys to the kingdom. "Margaret," I whispered into the phone, my heart starting to pound with a new fierce rhythm. "I think you're right. I think Robert did something." I ended the call and my fingers flew across the screen, finding David Miller's number. It was after 10 o'clock, but I didn't care. I pressed the call button. It rang once, twice, a third time. I was about to hang up when a groggy voice answered. "David Miller." "David, it's Eleanor Vance. I am so sorry to call this late, but I need to ask you something. It's about the money I gave Ethan for his house." I told him everything that had happened. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear the rustle of papers, the click of a keyboard. Then his voice came back, sharp and awake now. "Eleanor," he said, and his tone sent a shiver down my spine. I need you to sit down. What I'm about to tell you is going to change absolutely everything. I was already sitting down, but I gripped the steering wheel of my car until my knuckles turned white. I'm sitting, David. Just tell me. Robert was a smart man, Eleanor. A very smart man, he began. When you came to my office to arrange the transfer of that $90,000, he had already given me explicit instructions. You weren't just giving them money for a down payment. You were entering into a formal agreement. The documents you signed that day weren't gift affidavits. They were loan documents, secured by a 33% equity stake in the property they were purchasing. On paper, Eleanor, in the eyes of the law, you are a co-owner of that house. The world tilted on its axis. Co-owner. I wasn't a guest. I wasn't an unpaid housekeeper. I was a part owner. The breath I had been holding rushed out of me in a shaky exhale. All this time I had been walking on eggshells in a house that was, in part, legally mine. Robert, my dear, practical Robert, had reached out from beyond the grave to protect me. A strange calm, as sharp and clear as ice, settled over me. The grief and humiliation began to recede, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I looked back at the house, at the warm light spilling from its windows. Through the living room window I could see them. Ethan and Chloe. They had a bottle of champagne open. They were laughing, toasting each other. Toasting their freedom from me. The sight should have broken my heart. Instead, it filled me with a righteous fire. Now, I know some of you listening might think what I did next was cruel, that it was vengeful. But I want you to put yourself in my shoes. When you have been pushed and pushed and pushed and finally told that your very existence is a burden, sometimes you have no choice but to push back. And you push back with everything you have. David, I said, my voice low and steady, are those documents ironclad? As solid as the U.S. Constitution, he replied. They can't fight it. It's all signed, notarized, and filed with the county. Good, I said. A plan was forming in my mind, swift and decisive. I want you to prepare a notice of intent to sell. Under the terms of co-ownership, I am exercising my right to force a sale of the property to liquidate my equity. Have it ready to be served first thing Monday morning. There was a moment of stunned silence from David. Then a low whistle. Eleanor. That's aggressive. They wanted me to disappear, David, I said. I'm just disappearing my name from the deed. Consider it done, he said, a new respect in his voice. I'll have a process server at their door at 9 a.m. sharp. We hung up, but I wasn't finished. My fingers, no longer trembling, scrolled through my contacts. I found the number for the Palmetto Club, the lavish downtown venue where the wedding reception was scheduled for the next day. A cheerful young woman answered, the night coordinator. The Palmetto Club, how can I help you? Hello, I said, my voice all business. My name is Eleanor Vance. I'm calling about the Vance Parker wedding reception scheduled for tomorrow evening. Oh yes, Mrs. Vance. We're so excited. Everything is all set. The floral arrangements just arrived. They're beautiful. There's been a change of plans, I said coolly. I need to cancel the event. The coordinator was flustered. Cancel? Ma'am, we can't. I mean, it's tomorrow. The food has been ordered. The staff is scheduled. I understand, I said, cutting her off. But I believe if you check the contract, you'll find it is under my name, Eleanor Vance. And it was paid for in full with my credit card. Is that correct? There was a frantic shuffling of papers. Yes, ma'am. That's correct. Then I am canceling it, I said. Please send me the final bill for any applicable cancellation fees to my email address. Thank you. I ended the call before she could protest further. I leaned my head back against the seat, a slow smile spreading across my face. The weight that had been crushing my chest for months was gone. In its place was a feeling I hadn't felt since Robert died. Power. The storm was no longer mine to endure. It was theirs. And it was just getting started. I started the car and pulled away from the curb, not looking back once. I checked into a modest hotel across town. A place that was clean, anonymous, and blessedly quiet. I ordered room service, a simple club sandwich and a glass of iced tea, and sat by the window, watching the distant lights of the city. I wasn't the grieving widow begging for a place in her son's home anymore. I was a 33% owner of that home, and the person who had just pulled the rug out from under their dream wedding. My phone started buzzing around 11:30 p.m. It was a number I didn't recognize. I ignored it. It buzzed again. And again. On the fifth call, I picked it up and put it on speaker, setting it on the table beside my sandwich. "What did you do?" The shriek was so loud I had to pull back. It was Chloe, and she was hysterical. How could you? How could you do this to us? The venue just called. They said the reception is canceled. You ruined everything. Everything. I took a calm bite of my sandwich before I answered. "Hello, Chloe. I see you got my message." "Your message? You call this a message? This is a declaration of war. You're a cruel, bitter old woman. You've ruined my wedding," she screamed, her voice breaking into sobs. "Now let's be clear," I said, my voice as placid as a calm lake. "I did not cancel your wedding. You and Ethan are free to get married tomorrow. The church is still booked, I assume. The guests can still watch you say your vows. All I did was cancel the $18,000 party that I was paying for. The party you felt entitled to while telling me to get out of your lives." There was a sputtering sound on the other end. But the guests. The food. My reputation. What are we supposed to tell people?" "I don't know, Chloe," I said, taking a sip of my iced tea. "Perhaps you can tell them the truth. Tell them you asked your primary benefactor to disappear, and she obliged." The line went silent, except for the sound of her ragged, angry breathing. She had no answer for that. She had expected me to crumble, to plead for her forgiveness. She had never, in her wildest dreams, expected me to fight back. "You will regret this, Eleanor," she finally spat, her voice dripping with venom. "No, my dear," I said softly. "I believe you are the one who is already regretting things." And with that I ended the call. I turned my phone off completely, finished my dinner, and for the first time in over a year, I slept soundly, without the feeling of being an intruder in someone else's house. The knock on my hotel room door came at 8 o'clock the next morning. Her wedding day. I already knew who it would be. I opened the door to find Ethan standing there. He looked terrible. His shirt was wrinkled, his hair was a mess, and his eyes were red-rimmed and bloodshot. He looked like he hadn't slept at all. "Mom," he said, his voice hoarse. He tried to push his way into the room, but I stood firm. "We can talk in the lobby," I said, my tone leaving no room for argument. We sat in two uncomfortable armchairs near the empty breakfast buffet. He started talking before I was even fully seated. It was a torrent of panicked words. The guests were flying in, their families were calling. Chloe was a mess, she'd been crying all night. This was a disaster, a humiliation. "You have to fix this, Mom," he pleaded, leaning forward, his eyes desperate. "Call the venue back. Tell them it was a mistake. We'll pay you back. Eventually." I just looked at him. "My son. Eventually?" I asked quietly. "Like you eventually paid me back for the $90,000 down payment? Or the $40,000 in emergencies over the last year? The new transmission for your car? Chloe's dental work? That investment opportunity? That vanished into thin air?" He flinched, a dull flush creeping up his neck. He hadn't expected me to have the numbers. He thought I was just a sentimental old woman who didn't keep track. "The total, Ethan, is $130,000. I continued, my voice gaining strength. $130,000 of the money your father and I worked our entire lives for. Your inheritance. And in return for that, I was told to disappear." He slumped back in his chair, the fight going out of him. "I didn't mean it like that, Mom." "Your silence meant it, Ethan," I said, cutting him off. "Your silence was the cruelest part. Now, here's what is going to happen. I own 33% of that house. On Monday morning, a man will knock on your door and serve you papers informing you of my intent to sell. You and Chloe will have two options: buy me out or the house goes on the market. There is no third option." I stood up, smoothing down my slacks. "I'm not fixing this. I'm finishing it. I suggest you go and get ready for your wedding." I turned and walked toward the elevator, leaving him sitting there speechless, in the sterile lobby of my hotel. I didn't look back. I knew this was just the beginning of the fight, but I had won the first round. For 2 days there was silence. A deafening, unnerving silence. I imagined they had gotten married in some small, pathetic ceremony, the ghost of their grand reception hanging over them. I stayed in the hotel, using the time to get my own affairs in order, speaking with David the lawyer to make sure everything was prepared for Monday. I felt a strange sense of peace, the quiet before a much larger storm. I should have known it was too quiet. The phone rang on Sunday afternoon. It was my younger sister, Carol, calling from her home in Florida. Her voice was tight with a concern that felt manufactured. "Eleanor? Honey, I was just calling to check on you. Are you feeling all right?" "I'm fine, Carol. Why do you ask?" I said, a knot of suspicion tightening in my stomach. "Well," she said, drawing the word out, "I just got off the phone with Chloe. Such a sweet girl. She called to tell me the wedding was downsized. And she sounded so worried about you." I stayed silent, letting her talk. "She said you've been, well, not yourself lately. Confused. Forgetting things. She said you got terribly upset about the wedding and had some sort of episode, canceling the reception in a fit of pique. She's worried you're being taken advantage of financially. She mentioned something about you thinking you own part of their house." "Eleanor, honey, that's not right, is it?" I was floored. It was as if the floor had dropped out from under me. This was their next move. It wasn't enough to push me out. It wasn't enough to betray me. Now they were trying to paint me as mentally incompetent. They were poisoning the well, turning my own family against me with calculated, vicious lies. Chloe wasn't just a spoiled brat. She was a methodical, cruel strategist. "Carol," I said, my voice dangerously calm, "let me be very clear. Every word that girl told you is a lie. A carefully constructed lie to cover up what they've done." "Oh, Eleanor, don't be dramatic," she said dismissively. Chloe sounded genuinely concerned. "She thinks you might need help. Maybe you should see a doctor." I felt a cold rage seep into my bones. My own sister, taking the word of a girl she'd met twice over me. "Thank you for your concern, Carol," I said, my voice clipped. "But I have everything under control." I hung up before she could say another word. My hands were shaking. This was a new level of warfare. This wasn't just about the house or the money anymore. This was an attack on my character, my sanity, my very identity. They were trying to erase me, to rewrite the story so that I was the villain, a crazy, jealous old woman lashing out. Just to be sure, I called my cousin in Georgia. It was the same story. "Chloe called. She's so worried about you, Eleanor. She said you're having memory problems." The smear campaign was in full effect. They were laying the groundwork to contest my legal claims, to argue that I wasn't of sound mind when I made them. I sank onto the edge of the hotel bed, my mind racing. They were more cunning than I had given them credit for. They were trying to strip me of my credibility before I even had a chance to present my case. But as the initial shock wore off, the fear was replaced by something else. A grim determination. Chloe thought she was smart. She thought she could outmaneuver me with whispers and lies. But she had made a fatal error. She had underestimated me. She saw a quiet, grieving widow she could easily manipulate. She had no idea that she had just awakened a sleeping giant. They wanted to question my sanity? They wanted to paint me as confused and incompetent? Fine. Let them. They had just handed me the one thing I needed to utterly destroy them. They had provided the motive. It was no longer just a financial dispute. Now it was a clear-cut case of elder abuse and exploitation. And I had the receipts to prove it. Chloe thought she was playing chess. She didn't realize I was about to flip the whole board over. Monday morning arrived, gray and humid. At precisely 9:05 a.m., I received a text from David. "Server has confirmed delivery. They have been served." A small grim smile touched my lips. The game was officially afoot. I spent the morning at a local library, using their computers to print out every piece of financial documentation I could find. Bank statements showing the wire transfer. Credit card bills detailing the emergencies I had paid for. Emails from Ethan asking for money. I compiled it all into a neat, organized folder. I was preparing for a battle, and I would not be caught unarmed. I returned to my hotel room around noon. I had just taken off my shoes when there was a sharp, official-sounding knock on the door. It wasn't the timid knock of a housekeeper. It was firm, deliberate. My heart gave a little lurch. I wasn't expecting anyone. I looked through the peephole and saw a woman I didn't recognize. She was in her 40s, dressed in a professional blazer and slacks, holding a clipboard. A cold dread trickled down my spine. I knew with a sudden sickening certainty who she was. I opened the door. "Mrs. Eleanor Vance?" she asked, her expression neutral. "Yes. My name is Susan Pritchard. I'm a caseworker with the South Carolina Adult Protective Services." My breath caught in my throat. APS. This was their nuclear option. They had actually done it. They had reported me to the state as an endangered, incompetent adult. It was a move of such breathtaking cruelty, such utter desperation, that I almost had to admire its audacity. They were trying to have me declared legally unfit to manage my own affairs, which would nullify my claim on the house and potentially put them in control of my finances. You can imagine the horror, can't you? Being investigated by a government agency because your own child has claimed you've lost your mind. It's a nightmare scenario designed to intimidate, to humiliate, to break you. I felt a moment of pure, terrifying panic. What if she believed them? What if they took everything away from me? But then the fury returned, chasing the fear away. This was the ultimate insult, the final betrayal. And I was ready for it. I took a deep breath, composing my features into a mask of calm, polite concern. "Adult Protective Services?" I said, feigning surprise. "My goodness. Is there a problem? Please come in." I stepped back, holding the door open for her. She entered the room, her eyes taking in everything. The neat suitcase in the corner, the organized stack of papers on the small desk, my calm demeanor. She was looking for signs of confusion, of squalor, of a person not in control. She wasn't finding any. "Thank you, Mrs. Vance," she said, taking a seat in the armchair I gestured to. I sat opposite her on the edge of the bed, my posture straight, my hands folded calmly in my lap. She opened her clipboard. "We received an anonymous report expressing concern for your welfare," she began, her voice professional but not unkind. "The report alleged that you may be experiencing some cognitive decline, memory loss, and exhibiting erratic behavior, particularly regarding your finances. It was suggested that you might be vulnerable to exploitation, or perhaps posing a danger to your own financial stability." She looked up at me, her gaze searching. "Mrs. Vance," she said, her voice softening slightly, "can you tell me a little bit about your recent financial decisions? For example, the report mentioned you canceled a rather expensive wedding reception just this past weekend." I met her gaze without flinching. A slow, sad smile touched my lips. "I can," I said. "I'd be happy to explain everything. In fact, I was just preparing some documents that I think you'll find very illuminating." I stood up and walked over to the desk. I picked up the folder I had so carefully prepared. It felt heavy in my hand, heavy with the weight of truth. I walked back and placed it gently on the small table between us. The game had changed. They thought they were the hunters and I was the prey. They were about to find out just how wrong they were. I tapped the top of the folder. "Everything you need to know is right in here," I said. "But please allow me to walk you through it." Miss Pritchard looked from the folder to my face, a flicker of curiosity in her professional gaze. She opened it. The first page was a copy of the bank statement showing the $90,000 wire transfer from my savings account to Ethan's. I had highlighted the memo. "Loan for home purchase." "The report you received probably mentioned a gift," I said calmly. "As you can see, it was never a gift. It was a loan." Her eyebrows raised slightly. She turned the page. The next document was a copy of the official loan agreement, the one David had sent over that morning, signed by myself, Ethan, and Chloe, and notarized by my lawyer. It clearly stipulated the terms, including the 33% equity I held in the property as collateral. "This is the legal agreement for that loan," I explained. "As you can see, I am a part owner of the house my son and his wife currently reside in." Ms. Pritchard read the document carefully, her expression becoming more serious. She was no longer just assessing my mental state, she was investigating a case. "Next," I said, "you'll find the credit card statements." I had printed the last 12 months' worth. I had gone through with a highlighter, marking every charge that was not for me. There was the $4,500 charge at the auto repair shop for Ethan's new transmission, the $8,000 charge to a cosmetic dentist for Chloe's veneers, A series of cash advances totaling over $10,000 that Ethan had sworn were for a can't-miss investment opportunity with a friend. And dozens of smaller charges, dinners, clothes, groceries, that they had put on my card, the one I had given them for emergencies only. These, I said, my voice steady, are the so-called emergencies that my son and daughter-in-law have had over the past year. Over $40,000 worth. While they were living rent-free in a house I paid for, they were also using me as their personal ATM. Ms. Pritchard was silent, her pen flying across her notepad. She turned another page. This time it was a printout of the emails. Emails from my sister, my cousin, my nephew. All of them describing the concerned phone calls they had received from Chloe over the weekend. And this, I said, my voice hardening, is the smear campaign. This is my daughter-in-law systematically contacting my family members to lay the groundwork for your visit today. She is telling them I am confused, unstable, and irrational. Does that sound like the action of a concerned loved one, Ms. Pritchard? Or does it sound like the action of someone trying to discredit their primary financial victim before she can fight back? Finally, I reached for my phone. There's one last thing, I said. I believe this will remove any doubt you might have. I found the audio file and pressed play. Chloe's voice, shrill and furious, filled the quiet hotel room. What did you do? You ruined everything. Everything. You're a cruel, bitter old woman. Miss Pritchard listened to the entire 3-minute tirade, her face a stony mask. She heard my calm, measured responses. She heard Chloe's threats. When it was over, I turned it off. The silence that followed was profound. The caseworker closed the folder. She took a deep breath and looked me straight in the eye. All professional neutrality was gone, replaced by a look of grim sympathy. Mrs. Vance, she said, her voice low and firm. Based on the extensive and well-organized evidence you've presented, and our conversation today, I can see absolutely no signs of cognitive decline. You are sharp, lucid, and in full control of your faculties. She paused, her gaze unwavering. What I do see, she continued, is a clear, deeply disturbing pattern of financial exploitation, emotional manipulation, and what appears to be a calculated attempt to defraud you by having you declared incompetent. You are not the person who needs to be investigated here. You are the victim. A wave of validation so powerful it almost made me dizzy washed over me. To be seen. To be believed. It was everything. She stood up, closing her notepad. I will be filing my report this afternoon. It will state unequivocally that the anonymous tip was unfounded, malicious, and that you are a competent adult. In fact, I will be recommending that the district attorney's office review this case for potential charges of financial elder abuse against your son and daughter-in-law. I stood up as well, my legs feeling stronger than they had in years. I had won. I had not only defended myself, I had turned their most vicious weapon back on them. I walked her to the door. Thank you, Miss Pritchard, I said, my voice thick with emotion. Thank you for listening. I was just doing my job, she said. You take care of yourself, Mrs. Vance. As the door closed behind her, I leaned against it, the folder of truth still in my hand. The game board hadn't just been flipped. It had been shattered into a million pieces. Now it was time for checkmate. The meeting was set for Wednesday morning at David's law office. The air in the conference room was thick with attention so heavy it felt like you could cut it with a knife. The room itself was imposing, with dark wood paneling and shelves lined with intimidating-looking law books. The polished mahogany table between us felt less like a piece of furniture, and more like a battlefield. I sat on one side with David. On the other side sat Ethan and Chloe. They looked like they had been through a war. Ethan was pale and gaunt, staring at the table as if it held the secrets of the universe. Chloe was a shadow of her former self. Her usual immaculate makeup was gone, her eyes were puffy and red from crying, and her hands were twisting a tissue into shreds in her lap. The smug confidence was gone, replaced by a raw, desperate fear. David began, his voice calm and authoritative, allowing no room for emotion. Let's be clear about where we stand, he said, his eyes fixed on Ethan and Chloe. My client Eleanor Vance is the legal co-owner of your property at 124 Magnolia Drive, holding a 33% stake. This is not debatable. He slid a copy of the deed across the table. It landed in front of them with a soft thud. Furthermore, he continued, his voice dropping slightly. An investigation by Adult Protective Services was conducted on Monday at your request. I have a copy of the caseworker's report here. He slid a second document across the table. It concludes that my client is of perfectly sound mind and is, in fact, the victim of what the report calls a disturbing pattern of financial and emotional exploitation. The report has been forwarded to the district attorney's office for review. Chloe let out a small choked sob. Ethan finally looked up, his eyes wide with panic. The threat of legal charges of real life-altering consequences was finally sinking in. I let them absorb the weight of it for a long moment. Then I spoke. I am giving you two choices, I said, my voice steady and clear. I had rehearsed this. Choice 1, you buy me out. You will pay me the initial $90,000, plus the $42,700 you charged to my credit cards. The total is $132,700. You have 30 days to secure a loan and pay me, at which point I will sign my name off the deed. I paused, letting the number hang in the air. Choice 2, I continued, is that we don't reach an agreement. In that case, I will proceed with the partition sale. The house will be put on the market immediately, sold to the highest bidder, and the proceeds will be split according to ownership. You will be forced to move out, and I will still discuss pursuing criminal charges with the DA. The silence in the room was absolute. Ethan looked like he was going to be sick. Chloe finally broke, her shredded tissue forgotten. We can't, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. We don't have that kind of money. We'll lose everything. Eleanor, please. Don't do this. It was a mistake. I was scared. Scared? I asked, my voice devoid of sympathy. Yes, she said, her words tumbling out in a desperate rush. I grew up with nothing, Eleanor. My mom was always dodging landlords. We had eviction notices taped to our door. I spent my whole childhood terrified of being thrown out on the street. That fear. It never left me. When I saw you living in our house with so much financial power over us, it twisted into something ugly. I felt like you could take it all away at any moment. What I said, it came from panic, not hate. For the first time, I saw past the entitled brat to the frightened child inside. I saw the root of her cruelty, and for a fleeting moment, I felt a sliver of pity, but it was just a sliver. I leaned forward, my eyes locking onto hers. Chloe, I said, my voice softening just a fraction but still firm as steel. Your fear might explain your behavior, but it does not excuse it. Everyone has a story. Everyone has wounds. But you made a choice. You chose to be cruel. You chose to lie. You chose to try and have me declared mentally incompetent to save yourself. And now you must face the consequences of those choices. Ethan finally found his voice. Mom, there has to be another way. $132,000. It's impossible. We'll be ruined. His voice cracked on the last word. David cleared his throat. The alternative, he reminded them gently, is losing the house altogether and potentially facing a grand jury. That stark reality seemed to land on them with a physical weight. They were trapped. They had built their cage of lies and entitlement, and now the door had slammed shut. I looked at them, at their tear-streaked faces and their palpable desperation. And in that moment I realized I didn't want to ruin them. Revenge had felt sweet for a moment, but what I truly wanted was not their destruction, but my own peace. And more than that, I wanted them to learn. I wanted them, for the first time in their lives, to understand the meaning of responsibility. So I offered them one final measure of mercy. A third option. I will amend the buyout, I said, and both their heads snapped up, a desperate hope dawning in their eyes. I will reduce the amount to the original $90,000. A wave of relief so intense it was visible washed over them. Chloe started to cry again, this time with gratitude. But I held up a hand. On several non-negotiable conditions, I said. David slid a newly prepared document into the center of the table. Condition 1, I said, ticking them off. Chloe, you will find and maintain a full-time job. You have 30 days to provide proof of employment to my lawyer. Condition 2. You will sell the luxury SUV. Both of you will drive sensible used cars. No more $500 car payments. Condition 3. You will enroll in a financial counseling program, approved by my lawyer, and provide monthly progress reports for the next 2 years. And condition 4, I said, my voice hardening again as I looked at Chloe. You will write a personal letter of apology to every single family member you lied to about my mental state. You will tell them the truth about what you did and why you did it. David will receive copies of these letters before they are sent. I leaned back in my chair. If you violate a single one of these conditions, at any time in the next 2 years, the full $130,000 debt becomes immediately due. If you default on that, the house goes on the market. There will be no more chances. Do you understand? Ethan rubbed his forehead. His shoulders slumped in defeat. Yes, Mom, he whispered. Chloe, wiping her eyes, just nodded, unable to speak. I'll take any job, she finally managed to say. I'll do anything to keep our home. David pushed the agreement and a pen toward them. Then I suggest you sign. With a hand that trembled visibly, Ethan picked up the pen. The scratch of the nib on the paper was the only sound in the room. He signed his name. Then he pushed it toward Chloe. Her own tears smudged the paper slightly as she added her signature below his. I watched them, not with glee, but with a heavy sense of justice served. This was never about punishing them for the sake of it. It was about reclaiming my dignity. It was about protecting my future. It was about teaching a brutal, necessary lesson about consequences. When David notarized the signatures and filed the documents, the deal was sealed. The balance of power had shifted permanently. I was no longer the unwanted guest in their house. I was the woman who owned a piece of their future, the one who had finally drawn a line in the sand that could not, and would not be crossed. As I walked out of that law office and into the bright Carolina sunshine, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt free. 6 months later, I wake up not to the muffled sounds of a suburban street, but to the gentle lapping of water against a shore. From the balcony of my new apartment, I can see the sun rising over Lake Norman, painting the water in strokes of gold and rose. The air is clean, and the only sound is the call of a distant loon. I sold my 33% of the Charleston house back to Ethan and Chloe, under the strict terms of our agreement. The $90,000 wasn't a windfall, it was my own money returned to me. I used it to leave Charleston behind, to leave the ghosts of that house and that life. I moved here 2 hours north to a small quiet retirement community on the lake. It was the best decision I ever made. My life is my own now, in a way it hasn't been since before Robert got sick. In the mornings I join a group of women, my neighbors, for a walk along the trails that wind through the pine trees. We talk about our grandchildren, our gardens, our past lives. They are women like me, women who have stories, women who have survived. In their company I don't feel alone. In the afternoons I have my book club, or I volunteer at the local library. I've even taken up watercolor painting, something I've always wanted to do. My small apartment is filled with my things. Photos of Robert are everywhere. The quilt from our old bed is draped over my favorite armchair. The walls are covered not with bland store-bought art, but with my own clumsy, joyful paintings of the lake. Hanging on a hook right by my front door is a single plain key. To anyone else it would look like nothing. To me it's a symbol heavier than gold. It is the key to my own front door. A reminder that I, and I alone, decide who gets to step into my life. That choice, that simple power, has brought me a peace I had forgotten I could feel. I still hear from them, of course. Ethan calls once a week. The conversations are stilted, awkward. He's trying. He tells me about their budget, about how they sold the SUV and are now sharing a 10-year-old Honda. He tells me Chloe is working as a receptionist at a medical clinic. He sounds tired, but he also sounds like an adult. For the first time, I no longer cover their bills. I no longer rush to fix their emergencies. My days are lighter, my nights are calm. I am living a life that belongs only to me. I thought that was how the story would end, with a quiet, peaceful distance, with justice served and lessons learned. I thought our relationship would be one of polite, formal phone calls for the rest of our lives. But then one evening about a month ago, as I was watching the sunset from my balcony, my phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me press the green button. Hello, Eleanor. The voice was quiet, hesitant. It took me a moment to place it. It was Chloe. I was silent for a moment, my guard immediately going up. Chloe, I said, my voice neutral. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, she began, her words coming out in a soft rush. And I understand. I needed to call. Ethan doesn't know I'm calling. I waited, saying nothing, letting her talk. I wanted to tell you. This job, she said, her voice trembling slightly. It's not glamorous. I answer phones and file charts. But every 2 weeks I get a paycheck. A real paycheck that I earned. And seeing the numbers, seeing how much things actually cost, it's shown me how careless I was with your money. How entitled I was. She took a shaky breath. I used to think money just appeared. Because for me, with you, it always did. I never understood what it represented. The hours you worked. The life you and Robert built. The sacrifices. I see it now. And I am so ashamed. This was different from the desperate, crying confession in the lawyer's office. There was no audience this time. There was no deal on the table. It was just her. Her voice raw with a sincerity I had never heard from her before. I know my fear about being poor isn't an excuse, she continued, as if she was reading my mind. It wasn't just panic. It was a deep, ugly selfishness. I saw you as a safety net, and when I thought that net might be taken away, I lashed out. I tried to destroy you so I could feel secure. It was monstrous. There is no other word for it. And I am so sorry, Eleanor. Not just for what I said, but for what I did. For the lies. For everything. I listened, the setting sun casting long shadows across my balcony. The wounds were still there. A single apology couldn't erase the months of feeling like a ghost. The sting of being told to disappear. The horror of being reported to the state. The scars would always be a part of me. But as I listened to her, I realized something. Holding on to my anger was like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. It was a weight, and I had been carrying it for too long. When she finished, I finally spoke. I hear you, Chloe, I said softly. And I appreciate the call. That's all, she said, sounding resigned. I just wanted you to know. No, I said, making a sudden decision. That's not all. The past can't be erased. Trust can't be rebuilt overnight. I can't pretend that what happened didn't happen. I took a breath. But perhaps we could have a different future. We could start with lunch. Next week. In a public place. Just to talk. The sound on the other end of the line was a small, sharp intake of breath. A sob of what sounded like genuine, overwhelming relief. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I would like that very much. That night, as I sat watching the last light fade from the sky, I understood a profound truth. Family isn't just about blood. It's about respect. It's about gratitude. It's about showing up for each other in honest, meaningful ways. I had spent so long trying to buy my place in a family, I never realized that true belonging can't be purchased. It has to be earned. By choosing myself, by drawing a line in the sand and demanding respect, I had finally taught them how to value me. And more importantly, I had finally learned how to value myself. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It wasn't easy to share, but I feel it's an important one. I have a question for all of you out there. Have you ever had to draw a difficult boundary with a family member to protect your own peace and dignity? Please, share your experience in the comments below. Your story might be the one that gives someone else the strength they need. And if my story resonated with you, please consider giving this video a like and subscribe for more stories like this. You are not alone.